So the first movement that we do in this approach is called the rocking motion. And so I'm just going to go through that with you again. And so the first piece that you're going to do is you're going to sink into your right leg a little bit so that it is able to take up the weight of your foot. And this is a very essential part of how this movement works, so that your left foot can come up and then move out. And you can move to something that feels about comfortable of your feet somewhat underneath you. But you'll notice, so if you see me sideways, that I'm just sinking into it a little bit as if there was a high stool here, and I'm just sort of dropping into it just slightly. So there's a bit of a flattening in your back. And at the same time, your toes are turning out just a bit. Now, all of this is adjusted for your own comfort. So the closer that your heels, I'm going to turn backwards so you can see this, the closer that your heels can come together is good, but it's not essential. So if you need to keep, for what feels comfortable for your body, your feet just slightly apart, that's fine too, but we like to kind of get that slight angle of your feet outwards. So that's the first part of a basic stance that we're going to use. So you're dropping into this right foot, it takes up the full weight. You come up with the left foot, and it comes out just that comfortable width apart. You do a little bit of just a slight sink. And you'll see it's going to become a little bit more of a sink as we come into the resting movements, but just a very slight sink at the beginning. Find yourself that comfortable place. And then we're going to start to do the rocking back and forth before I add in the hand movements again. So those of you who've done this before, you'll see how I'm going to start to build this up again. So I'm going to turn sideways so you can see what that rocking looks like. So first of all, the movement starts with going back onto the heels with your weight just a little bit. And as you do that, there should be just a little bit of a flattening in your lower back. So if you can take your hands from front and back and just kind of feel that if you go forward, there's onto the balls of your feet, there's a bit of an arching. And as you go back, there's a little bit of a flattening. And so you want to start getting that connection of weight transfer with your feet and the movement of your pelvis into just a little bit of a movement backward and forward like this. And at the same time, the movement of weight transfer in your feet is always just enough that you feel like you can drop into it. So you don't want to go back so far that you're feeling you're off balance. And the same as we start going forward onto the balls of your feet, always do the least possible so that you can get the feel of it without making yourself start to work. It's a very important part of this. So that movement is, as you go backward, weight's more on the balls of your feet, which you might, or sorry, on the heels of your feet, which might also be helped by perhaps just a slight lifting of your toes, just a hint of that. And then as you rock forward, your weight goes onto the balls of your feet, and there's just a slight release of pressure of your heels onto the floor. Some of you may feel that your heels want to lift a little bit, and that's just fine, but it's just really the essence of the weight transfer that you want to get and its effect on how your pelvis moves. And so as I come to the side again, let's all try this one more time, that as you come back onto your heels, you might notice that my knees are straightening. So there's a bit of a straight leg piece here. But as I come through the center, you see how I'm dropping, my knees soften, and there's just a slight dropping in of my knees. I'm exaggerating a bit, but then as I come forward onto the balls of my feet and rise up, you see how my legs are straightening again? So there's this little bit of a sink and then back. And that goes with this piece, like that. So if we just give ourselves a couple of those movements, just to make sure you've got the feel of that. So here we come from our resting position, sink into that right foot, step across, then coming back with your legs just straightening in the knees a little bit, sinking, coming up onto the balls of your feet, and here goes the second time. Like that, and then the third time we'll come into a closing. Up and closing in. So now having that as your basic starting piece, let's come back again and see what that looks like as we stand and then start to move backward and forward. So this is from the front, just going gently back onto the heels, forward onto the balls of your feet. And this motion is going to happen 9 times. Now, I've told you that you can do this seated as well. So for those of you who may find that standing for longer periods of time, that you either it isn't going to work for you or you just want to every once in a while have release from it, I'm also going to show you what it looks like seated. So you want to find a chair that is fairly flat, not too cushy, and you want to be able to sit on it somewhat forward to the front so that you've got some movement. And you want to use those sit bones in your pelvis as the balance point. And so the movement in this case, there's not as much movement on your feet, but that's not the main weight-bearing part at this point. So your movement is going to be more specifically into that arching in your lower back as you rock forward on the pelvis and flattening in the lower back as you come back in the pelvis. And if I'm doing this correctly, and I'm going to take my hand away so you can see this, that the movement is with basically an upper body that's staying fairly straight over top of that. So in other words, there's not like a leaning back or a leaning forward with your torso, and that makes sure that the movement is happening primarily in the lower back pelvis connection. So as we do the upper body movement, I'm just going to show that to you in the seated position for a moment. And so what that ends up looking like when you're seated is that you're starting in a starting position with your hands about like this, parallel to the floor. What that will look like standing is somewhat similar, but slightly dropped. So it's almost as if your hands are resting on a line coming out somewhere from the top of your pubic bone or a little bit higher, whatever feels comfortable for you. And there's a sense of dropping that happens through the forearms. You can see my forearms are relatively parallel to the floor. You'll be able to tell when you're going too low because you'll feel the strain in your wrists and it becomes difficult to keep your hands perfectly parallel to the floor. So someplace that feels like it comes down, that it kind of drops your elbows and shoulders but doesn't drop too low. That kind of gets that comfortable as if you're pushing down on a cushion of air. And you can see as I do that there's that little bit of a flattening in my lower back and dropping of the pelvis just a little bit as if I'm going into a high stool. So that's what that movement's going to look like seated, or that's what it looks like standing. And then if I look at it seated, it's a little bit higher. You can see I'm not dropping quite as far down. I'm coming down about the level of the top of my thighs. And then the movement is basically coming back with my hands, the palms facing backward, feeling into that little bit of back pressure of the air, coming just behind my torso, just behind my hips, and just letting myself turn my hands and scooping forward. And as I come forward, again engaging with that little bit of air pressure, coming up to about the middle of my chest, just below the collarbone, and just again turning and again finding the pressure as my hands come back. So there's just that sense of coming back and up. And I'm going to show you standing what this looks like in a moment as well, but you might notice if I turn the chair that I have to come a little bit beside my hips to get this part of the movement. And then as I come in or up, I can come in a little bit in front of my shoulder joints. And then, so there's a slight angling in that happens. It'll be even less so when I'm standing, but that same principle is here with the movement of the hands in rocking motion. So for example, here I am, I start stepping out, I come back, I'm coming back behind my hips. Then as I come forward and onto the balls of my feet, you can see that now my hands have come in just enough that they're in front of my shoulders. And then come back. And that turning around is a place where there's not that much of a sense of engagement. You're kind of in the in-between place, like when you're taking an out breath or an in-breath. They're kind of like the in-between places. And then you engage and release. Let's just try that for the 9 times. So this would be the third one. And I'm going to turn sideways so you can see this. You can see the pace. It's fairly slow. In fact, you can pretty much always be safe to experiment with going just a notch slower than what you're doing at any particular moment. You'll find that there's a tendency to kind of apply our exercise, moving ahead into life approach. I'll just do this 2 more times. And so just slowing down just a little notch, you'll sometimes feel that movement. Now the closing, I'm going to turn so you can see this, is a little bit of a thing where on the 9th one, you actually don't complete it. You close as you're going into the 9th one. So you can see as my hands start to come up, I sink into that right foot. My left foot comes in and I close like that. So if you just step back out with your left foot again, you can see that there's like this bit of like a sinking. And this is like a bit of a learned place, this transition place of the arms coming up and the foot coming in. And don't get yourself too teetery if you feel that you are like kind of figure out, well, maybe I need to bring my foot in first and then my hands up. But eventually you'll find that you can just kind of drop. It all feels like a natural thing that as you're sinking and your hands come up, you're rising with it and your foot comes in and you come to that gentle resting position. So that's the way that first rocking motion goes.